Okay. Thank you so much for getting us that, Karan. Some of the names which are buzzing in trade. Let me, in fact, go across. We're joined by Kunal Bothra, as we always have him in studio. 0.5% higher, Kunal, on a day like this. How are you viewing the market?
Yeah, I think good afternoon, first of all, Harsh.
Very good
We were
afternoon.
discussing this in the morning that the markets are due for a bounce. The indicators are deeply oversold on the benchmark indices. So this calls in for a good respite for the index in the near term. Hopefully, I think we may probably expect, at least the next 1 to 2 days, the markets trying to just about float about this, critical support of 23,000, 23,350-ish kind of a zone, which we tested yesterday and today morning. But I think what we need to also see is that whether the move today is led by a lot of short covering. We were discussing this point earlier that there has been a huge jump in the open interest on the Nifty futures as well as on the Bank Nifty futures in the last 5-6 days of the markets, where there has been a 45 lakh jump in the open interest for the Nifty and one of the highest open interest for the Bank Nifty in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So that itself tells you that if the markets have to move up higher, and if this just doesn't become like a solitary single day up move, then you need to see a decent amount of short covering. Even a 4% to 5% kind of a short covering for both these indices could probably trigger a further up move for the index. But so far, so good. I think we've bounced back from those oversold nature of indicators, which tells you that the market texture is a little bit better than what is in the last couple of days.
You're expecting short covering in the Bank Nifty, Kunal? Is that what I'm catching correctly? And is PSU Bank still the tilt?
Yeah, so short covering across the board. So short covering, across both the indices majorly, because what happens is in a falling market, it becomes very difficult to try and pinpoint which sectors and which stocks would underperform if it's a short-lived kind of an expected correction. So the best hub in those kind of time zones, they generally become indices. And that's why you see a sudden tilt more towards the index futures being more favored in terms of creating fresh shorts. Now, when the markets reverse course, and if traders expect or believe that maybe that near-term correction has panned out and they would want to now start booking out profits or at least cut down their short positions, then we go back into that tilt of looking at the index futures stance. That's why I believe looking at the index, both the Nifty and the Bank Nifty futures, and the reduction in open interest could be the first major signal to watch out for. And if that happens, it could be short covering across the board, both on the PSU banking names and the private sector banking stocks.
Interesting. And so is there a tilt or a preference within the two, and any stocks that you can give us within the Bank Nifty which one can play if at all this bounce were to play out?
See, interestingly, I was looking at the charts from the private sector banking names, and there are two odd names, in fact, three odd names which have started to look a little bit more resilient. So I'll call it resilient, not maybe a stronger degree of outperformance. And those three names rank up in the order of Kotak Bank, you've seen Axis Bank and ICICI Bank. These three stocks were the major reasons why the markets had fallen, or the Bank Nifty had fallen, specifically on the back of weakness on the private sector banking names. But apparently in the last 2-3 days, there has been a lesser degree of price correction into these three stocks. And today in the first half, when the market showed signs of comeback, I think names like Kotak Bank, Axis Bank, etc., they were the ones which bounced back quite decently from their intraday lows. So it tells you that maybe I think this could be a pocket where traders could keep an eye on. PSU banking names, I'm not sure whether the degree of short covering could be severe, because we are looking at a point where SBI is still struggling around the 970-ish kind of a mark. So till the time SBI doesn't make a strong comeback, I would believe that there could be just about very feeble attempts towards covering of short positions for the PSU banking names.
Okay, any other sector tilt that you have, Kunal?
So today there are fresh sectors which are showing signs of breakout.
Yes.
Paints, for example, have started to show signs of a breakout for themselves. The OMC stocks are looking attractive. My sense is that maybe there could be a wave of short covering over here also for the OMC names. And defense stocks they've been doing fantastically well. So I think these are the 2-3 fresh sectors which are starting to look a little bit more better than what they were poised in the last few days.
Interesting picks therefore, Kunal.
So two buy calls. The first one is apparently the one Grasim. Now a very strong chart in the making. The stock has come back very close towards the breakout of the 3,000 levels for Grasim. So we'll look at higher targets of 3,030. Stop loss to be kept at 2,900 for Grasim. The second would be a barn Nestlé. Going with the fact that the entire FMCG stocks would continue to shine and outperform. Nestlé is something which continues to look attractive at the current juncture. Trading at 1475 approximately, would look at a target of 1,545. Stop loss could be kept at 1,440.
Okay, and the other one is some of the telecom stocks. They are in focus. In fact, Kunal, I'll come to you in a minute with regard to that. Let me go across to Darshita. She's here with what to expect from Bharti Airtel's numbers.
Well, yes, Bharti Airtel is going to report its Q4 FY26 numbers, and the expectations suggest a stable quarter with margin expansion remaining the key highlight. Starting off with the headline numbers, the consolidated revenue is expected to come in around 54,615 crores, which translates into a 1% sequential growth. EBITDA is likely to rise nearly 3% QOQ, coming in at around 31,700 crore rupees, while the margins are expected to see an improvement of around 100 basis points, coming in at 58%. Meanwhile, the profit after tax could see a sharp jump of about 16%, coming to nearly 7,700 crore rupees. Now, coming to the India wireless business, the revenue growth is expected to stay modest at around 0.8% QOQ, which is partly impacted by 2 fewer days this quarter, while the ARPO is likely to remain stable at nearly 259 mark. Although the subscriber additions may soften slightly, also, the analysts are estimating that the mobile net adds of roughly 39 lakh users versus 43.5 lakh users last quarter, which is nearly 10.5% down QOQ. Besides this, the home segment is expected to maintain the healthy momentum, where the Africa operations could continue supporting the overall growth. And finally, the key monitorables for the street will include any commentary around the future tariff hikes, progress on the 5G monetization, and the management outlooks on the premium subscriber additions going ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Darshita. Now, Kunal, I know your views on Bharti, in fact, so I don't want to repeat that. I know that you're a long-term holder. You like this from a long-term story perspective, difficult to sell, but near-term weakness. Firstly, assess that for us. Is my thesis right? What about Vodafone?
Yeah, I think Vodafone is something which I believe at the current juncture looks extremely attractive. So purely momentum trading or a fresh breakout play, I think, is happening for Vodafone Idea, where the stock has looked extremely attractive. There's a different kind of a wave or a price uptrend which has come back into Vodafone Idea, because the earlier moves, the stock used to struggle to try and come back into a multi-week uptrend. But this time around, it's been almost linear, where the stock has moved up higher from 9.5, 10 levels to now 12.5 or 13 plus mark, or closer to 13 levels, where it's attempting as a breakout. This also coincides with a multi-month breakout for Vodafone Idea about this 12.5 to 13 levels. So that also augurs very well. And Bharti Airtel also, I think on the long-term charts, even though the stock has gone through a decent correction, I think long-term investors should look to utilize this correction. It's a very rare opportunity for a stock like Bharti Airtel. Even if you look at the last 4 to 5 years, you will hardly see a phase where the stock has corrected more than 20-25% and stayed at those levels for a long period of time. So I think this is one of those very rare times where Bharti Airtel has provided that kind of a correction. I think as a long-term perspective, should be lapped up.
Okay. All right. So that's the take with regard to Bharti. What we'll do is slip into a very short break. On the other side, we'll continue conversation. Staying also with us in the studio, by the way. And we'll continue conversation on the other side of this break. We'll get Investec Capital Services' view. We'll have Mukul Kochar who will come in, give us his views with regard to the market. Stay with us.